Hello everyone, thanks for dropping by. Today's Sunday and I won't be doing a video tomorrow, so I'm doing one today. I won't be doing one tomorrow because I'm going to visit Mum and Dad's grave. I usually do that on the 14th and 24th of every month. Anyway, in case you didn't know, that's Julia Stiles on the screen. And the only thing I've ever seen her in is the Bourne saga. I got upset when they killed a character off in the last Bourne movie. It just upset me. I watched it again years later on YouTube and it still upset me. I just didn't like it. I won't ever be watching it again as it's just too upsetting. And the usual question, would I date her? Nope. She's happily married with children. And besides that, she's 5'8" tall, which was surprising, which makes her a fraction shorter than Cate Blanchett. So, and that's even before she wears heels, so it'd be interesting to see what Julia looks like in real life at a Hollywood do or party or whatever they have, if they're super wealthy and I got an invite. But apart from that, I wouldn't even think of chatting her up or anything like that, because I knew it'd be on a hiding to nothing. But anyway, enough about Julia. As you know, the American birth rate has gone down, as well as the American marriage rate has gone down, and that is starting to have a storm that's starting to break all over the Western world, especially in the United States, because the first thing I found was this. As you can see, this is the Christian Broadcast Network, and if you scroll down, should be top priority new report urges government to invest in the American family. Now, this was done on the 28th of January this year. And it says in 1950, number of married Americans stood at 62%, but at 2025, stood by a renowned group, was dropped to 46%. When it comes to family growth in 2024, the US birth rate hit a record low. And you can see more and more individuals are delaying marriage if they get married at all, and even more striking, a massive decline in the number of babies being born. So typically the replacement rate should be around 2.1 for a country to actually replace itself effectively, and yet in America that number has continued to decline year after year. No mention that women only want the top 10 or 20% thanks to social media. And Walter, the co-author, believes that the only way forward for America is a society recommitted to the institution of marriage. Well, first of all, the woman has to marriage in a sexual market value, i.e. if she's a 4, she can't expect to get married to an 8. And you said we should stop punishing married families in America through welfare penalties and other marriage penalties. We should start supporting the American family through a host of multifaceted approaches. And drop down, yada, yada, yada. To counter the survey, Saving American Family report encourages a marriage boot camp for struggling families. The marriages don't need a boot camp. And it finishes off, it is our hope that the federal government will seriously consider these recommendations to refocus policies around saving and supporting the American family. The main concentration in the American government at the moment is the American economy and how it's getting closer to going off a cliff edge. Now, that's this CBN. Fast forward to January the 29th, 2026, I found this, the Heritage Foundation. I might have covered this article before in the past. As you can read, no marriage, no babies, no future, America's going from birth to death. And the collapse of the marriage and family represents the greatest threat to our nation's future. America, a nation rooted in its people, of course, same as other countries with an indigenous population. We're done watching our kids all fall behind, our families struggle and our social pillars crumble. We're calling for action that meets the moment. And it says a new report, the Congressional Budget Office, shows that absent immigration, America's population will begin to shrink by 2030, i.e., that's when 45 to 52% of American women will be single and childless. As we approach the 50th anniversary of our 250th, the projection underscores a hard truth that the collapse of marriage and family life represents the gravest threat to our great nation's future. And if you drop down, these proposals are the broad understanding of conservative priorities and new ideas, but half American population are leftish and liberals, all animated by shared beliefs. Strong American families were at the heart of the nation in 1976 and remain essential for its future. They are not offered as a final word, but as a beginning of a long-term, overdue national conversation about how to halt America's demographic and social collapse. Well, you can start that by reforming the female-friendly family courts. And then says, unfortunately, there are those on the radical left and liberal right who are rigidly and ideologically opposed to our key ideas for supporting married families. I think I've covered this article before, so I'll skip it and actually put them all below. Now, I found this looking around, and looks like the US Indy. Was that Grand Prix? Never mind. I found this, the Washington Times. It's apparently America's newspaper. Now, this was done on 22nd of June this year. The parallel decline in marriage and childbirth rates, the dissolution of the nuclear family will be our demise. Yeah, it's probably all done by design. Says we have passed through the annual celebration of mothers and fathers, some call it the Hallmark holidays. But if our current marriage and childbirth rates continue their downward trajectory, the greeting card giant may need to find other ways to boost its sales. A Hallmark is a greeting cards company. Unfortunately, Hallmark will not be the only one to suffer from the decline in mothers and fathers. Our society will too. This is a shame because marriage and families provide significant benefits for our nation and personal well-being. Tell that to the feminists. And then said several studies found that married people live longer than singles. That's debatable. Particularly single men, that's a pop at MGTOW, who are susceptible to early mortality. Maybe, maybe not. And then a Harvard study found socially isolated men had a 90% higher risk of dying from heart disease than men who have strong interpersonal relationships, including marriage. But what if the guy's in a miserable marriage? And he said that brings me to the second point. America's declining birth rates are pushing our society towards a dark demographic disaster. MGTOW could have told them that years ago, but they don't tend to listen to MGTOW. And he says, although they chose to be fathers who are more involved in their children's lives, which is a good thing, there are fewer fathers overall, which is not so good. Given the shitty deal that marriage has for guys these days, can you blame them? And he says the share of men aged 25 to 45 who are fathers has fallen from 2/3 in 1980 to 53% in 2024, and the number of men in that range who are childless has risen from 10 million in 1980 to 23 million in 2024. So, stepping back, you could say there's 23 million MGTOW men in the United States. Which would be 23, that's 1/10 of the American population. No, 330 million. Could be about 6, maybe 7% of the American population. Says the ranks of childless, meanwhile, are surging among younger, less educated, liberal and secular men. They could be simps, liberal. The going with feminist women in the hope that they can get laid. I could consider to rattle off statistics and show this trend to be long-term and negative effects on men and women, but the bottom line is this: while men are opt out of marriage and family formation, they become increasingly isolated and more likely to experience health problems such as heart disease. This places a greater burden on our healthcare system. Again, the old whipping boy. Single men are going to die poorly and there's heart disease and all that. But if a guy's on his own with a decent career, he's got more money to experience the things that he enjoys. And he says additional unmarried or either unmarried or childless men they confront lives with no love or support from the children they would have raised, but divorced men have the woman turn the children against them, so that's knocked that on the head, thus facing a long and despairing path toward death. Or he could travel the world and enjoy himself up to the day he dies. And as I write a new book, What Really Matters, he plug in his book, The Effects of Long-Term Health and Life Care and Society Connections Need to Keep People Mentally Engaged and Healthy. And we ignore the consequences of declining marriage, childbirth and fatherhood rates at our peril. If we want a healthy, happy society, we must return to one that places greater value on marriage and family formation and pursuing personal fulfillment. Now, that could be a pop at all these single men who are MGTOWs enjoying themselves without bothering to get involved in relationships, which in the long term is anything but fulfilling. It is my hope that publications such as Washington Post acknowledge that marriage is good for health and others show that having children is good for men. This trend can be reversed, resulting in greater personal and societal happiness and health. Now, the Washington Times seems to be a liberal-minded war newspaper that's mostly on the woman's side and trying to inadvertently shame men to getting married. So, the result of not getting married and having children is this. I found this in family studies. There's no mystery to America's fertility decline, and this was done by a woman June 30th this year. On the same day, two prominent opinion writers both addressed the U.S. fertility decline. Louise Perry, a woman, wrote in the Wall Street Journal, "Falling birth rates are a mystery." And another woman in New York Times stated, "It's not a mystery why fertility rates are falling," pointing to the significant drop in teen births as the most likely culprit. See what that brings up. Yes, I agree. Oh, bugger off. Paywall, you can fuck off. Anyway, back to the article. The highlights: the fertility rate amongst women aged 20 to 29 has declined 38% in the last 18 years. And by 2024, 1 in 5 American women reaching the age of their childbearing years, 18.8%, had never given birth, approaching a record high set in 2006. I bet all the 1 in 5 women are feminists, the man haters, or they only want the top 10 or 20% of men. And he said, from a demographic perspective, the US fertility decline is not a mystery at all. The data clearly point to the massive drop in the number of children women have during in their 20s is a direct cause. And then we got about the fertility between 07 and 25 years for total fertility rate dropped from a replacement level of 2.1 to 1.57 per woman today, and the drop in births among women aged 20 to 29 in their prime years accounts for 78% of the overall decline of the total fertility rate. And then calculated, then we drop down, births among women in their 20s, 2007, 25, and you can see the sharp drop. teenage years, college-age women, the post-college women going in careers, post-war, very post-war, cat ladies. And a dropping percentage can appear much more dramatic when the base of calculation is small. Fertility rates among teens dropped by 72% since 2007, ages 15 to 19, but the decline among women in their 20s is only 38%. They're trying to blind you with statistics. It says childlessness is near a record high. In fact, motherhood is shrinking quickly in the United States. By 2024, 2 years ago, the most recent year which data is available, nearly 1 in 5 women reach the end of their childbearing years, 18.8 as the highlight at the top, and never giving birth, approaching a record high. The childlessness is near a record high, and the MGTOW kicked off in around about 2000, dropped a bit, and then it crept up again. MGTOW might have affected that, but that's moot. It says, women who benefited from this new wave of reproductive technologies are born in the 60s and 70s, the in vitro fertilization. As any millennials born in the 80s enter their 40s in recent years, we have a steady rise in childlessness. The women born in the 80s will be getting into third and fourth wave feminism by the time they reach their teenage years and young adult years. And that, moving on. FIS Insights. This is a short thing. The number of unmarried men is surging, and if you look at the graph, 2000 is when MGTOW kicked off, and last year it started off 20.7 million, and it went up to 30.4 million. So the 15 years of MGTOW being available, 15 million men took the red pill, and you can see the result. This is the only article, only bit of it. With marriage in America, I found this, research 2026, average age of marriage by US state and city. So you've got the overall 30 for men, 28 for women. You notice they're approaching the wall. And if you drop down, oldest married state for women is Washington, D.C. That'd be on the West Coast. Youngest married state for women is Utah. That'd be where all the Mormons live. And the largest year increase, Women's Institute. And then you have the graphs, 5 oldest married states for women, New York, Massachusetts, Canada, New Zealand. And the youngest, Utah, that said where the Mormons live, Arkansas, Idaho, Kansas, and Oklahoma, the old cowboy country, the wheatlands of America. And then, depending if you're an American, what state you want to live in, you are currently living in, we have all the American states, so you just go down to pick your state. Say if you lived in New Jersey, 37 for men, 30 for women, combined, age gap, men plus women. You notice the women right across America, approaching the wall. They've had the fun, the fertile years are long past, and they're getting close to the wall, and they want to get married. As you see, the youngest one is 25 years, but she's still halfway through her most fertile period before she gets married. What she was doing for the past 5 years, maybe sleeping around. And then more statistics, etc. And to support that, I found this, USA Facts, how has marriage in the US changed over time? Fewer Americans are marrying than before, and when they do, they marry later in life, which that previous article has shown. says what percentage of Americans are married. In 2024, only 47.1% of households are headed by a married couple, the second lowest since 2022. All-time low of 46.8%. So it's just crept up a little bit. Households headed by married couples in the 2020s. This was the post-World War II, America at its peak. Lots of jobs everywhere. The 1960s, second wave feminism. 1990, third wave feminism. And you can see MGTOW kicked off in the 2020s at 52.8%, and now it's down to 47.3%. And the average age of marriage changed over time. It says the census tracked ages in 1890, your great-great-grandparents' time. That time the youngest maiden age of marriage was in 1956, when it was 22 for men and 20 for women. And age of the first marriage steadily increased in the late 1950s. Now, the contraceptive pill was developed in 1951. In 1960, it became available to the public, to women. So as you can see, the contraceptive pill became available, and women didn't need to get married to have children through fear of pregnancy, so they started probably sleeping around, and you can see the result. And men took advantage of that, women being free and easy, and that rose in tandem with the number of women delaying marriage later in life. Do you like the likelihood of marriage varied by race and ethnicity? It says the marriage rate amongst people who identify as white, Hispanic and black have dropped since 1990. For black and white people, more consensus data is available. The marriage rates for men have declined for all races and ethnicities except Asian men. Asians are more family orientated. But once again, 2000, MGTOW kicked off. Black men, the pioneers of MGTOW in American society, 43.2%, and it dropped to 37.8%. White men in 2000, 59.3%. Then we followed our black brothers to 54%, and Hispanics is 55.1%. And then it dropped down to 46.2%. And it says the biggest decreases in marriage rates were among Hispanic men and women. Marriage rates for Hispanic men decreased 10.3% for men from 1990 to 2024, and Hispanic women 11.3 points. Hispanic women might be like white American liberal women and going after the top 10 and 20% of Hispanic men. And then black men and women have had the lowest marriage rate amongst all races and ethnicities. For black men, the rate dropped from 45.90 to 37.8, like that graph showed. And then divorced and widowed, more graphs, and that's that. Moving on, I found this family studies, which is one of the other ones. 1 in 3 record share of young adults will never marry. In 1967, 85% of 25-year-old women had never married among 75% of 25-year-old men. This was the height of the baby boom. Unfortunately, married also ended up having the highest divorce rates observed in American history, because in 1965, second wave feminism kicked off. But these rates were also unusual in 1920, just 70% of 25-year-old women and 50% of 25-year-old men had never been married, but times were different in the 1920s. The There's no reason to support young adults' marriage rates could have or should have been remain at baby boom levels. And the highlights: ever marriage shares today are historic lows for 35-year-old and 45-year-old men and women. But 45-year-old men and women don't want to go with a 35-year-old man with a 35-year-old woman because she's got baggage. Plausibly, 1/3 of men and women born to turn 45 in 2050, those who are about 18 or 19 today, will not have married. You could say that is a combination of feminism and the MGTOW effect. Only about 60% of 35-year-old men are ever married today, down from 90% in 1980. That could be the MGTOW effect. And then we drop down. Historic and forecast ever marriage shares of age and sex. Once again, the contraceptive pill was released in 1963-64, and you can see women could get the contraceptive pill, no failure of pregnancy, so they didn't bother to get married to have sex, and the men followed the women's being free and easy. And you drop down that. Now this demographic chaos cliff edge that we've gone off with no children being born is starting to have serious repercussions. In the International Council of Men and Boys, UN urged the threat to global collapse of birth rates as a demographic emergency. Now if you drop down, the South Korea, we all know about that. In Europe, we all know about that, though at Birchwood yesterday shopping, it was wall-to-wall with infants and toddlers. At least I could say about 80 or 90 of them. Never seen so many children in one spot. And here's America. United States fell to 1.6% in 2024, an all-time low. In short, most of the world's population now live in countries well below replacement levels. The arithmetic is unforgiving. Fewer children today means fewer workers tomorrow, which I suspect that is all what the governments are frightened of, and more retirees for each to support, me being one of them. The fertility decline also tracks the worldwide retreat from marriage. That could be a nod towards feminism, which precedes most childbearing. Experts warn that fertility will not recover until family formation does. But the leftists and feminists don't want that. They'll say it's slavery. And the USO machinery points out the way for 50 years focus on UN Population Fund has centered on contraception and family planning, its largest budget item, built no comparable effort for families' forms. And then just little bits about it. On the subject of childbearing, lots of women are having babies, but I found this hidden crisis of paternity fraud, a global perspective. As you can see, this is Medium. This was done on June 25th last year. If you drop down, 30% of paternity tests in America show the tested man was not the biological father, but this figure typically comes from tests done when doubt already exists, not from random sampling. Studies using unbiased sampling place non-paternity rates around 1.4% for average births. So 25%, the guy is not the father. The mama's baby, papa's maybe. Much higher, 10 to 30% in disputed cases. We've all seen if you're American, the TV coverage of paternity cases in family courts when the guy is shown to be not the child's father. In 2005, Federal Synonymous reported about 30% of uncontested paternity cases exclude the alleged father, but in over 70% of these contested cases, the accused man is the true father, as despite this, some U.S. men's rights advocates are campaigning for universal or mandatory paternity testing at birth to prevent false child support claims. Yes. And it's even worse in Jamaica, which I've covered in previous video. Credible official data is lacking. Anecdotal testimony from genealogical and men's rights discussions suggest in America and cultural similar nations like Ghana, rates of non-paternity could rise to 30% or higher. These claim 70% non-paternity in sample groups, although these are anecdotal and localized, not broad-based. So Jamaican and Ghanaian women are sleeping around and getting knocked up by someone, and they're saying that the child is her partner's baby. And as we know, in France, is outlawed paternity tests. What are the French government scared of? The rationale, widespread testing threatens family stability. Judge-ordered tests online aim to balance the child's well-being and social cohesion. In other words, the French government doesn't want mass social unrest, with guys finding out they're not the child's father. Government fears and collateral risks. In nations considering mandatory newborn paternity testing, some rulers refuse to proceed out of concern that an epidemic of revelations would lead to violence, family breakdown and potential harm to women. Like in France, they're scared to death of the backlash from men, driven by enraged and emotionally destabilized men. These fears mirror France's official line about preserving community stability. Critics argue this protects responsible parents rather than fostering accountability. But a French guy finds out that he's not the father of his children. What's he going to do? And a diamond test analogy. Some advocates pointed out that men who are confident of their paternity wearing real diamonds shouldn't fear a paternity test. Only insecurity or deception would make a test discomforting. This controversy analogy undermines the tension. Is paternity about ownership, biological certainty? Yes. Or trust, social commitment? But if she's been playing around and she's got knocked up by somebody, especially if she was a mud shark, then we're going to have all sorts of trouble. What the data really says: typical birth cohorts, 1 to 4% paternity, disputed cases 17 to 30%, high confidence dads 1.7 to 3.3. But that doesn't sound very encouraging, but that is the main problem one. And the bigger debate, trust versus trust. Mandatory testing offers certainty of fairness and risks disputing families, provoking backlashes and exposing women to threats. It also shows a woman has been unfaithful. And then paternity testing sits at the crossroads of personal freedom, social stability and family integrity. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. Well, there is. He's either biological father or he's not. If he's not, then she's been unfaithful. Whether you learn toward transparency or caution, this debate isn't about science, it's about power, trust, and human dignity. Yeah, but when she's got the tingles and baby rabies, that human dignity tends to go out the window if Chad comes along and she sleeps with him. Now, finish this off because I'm probably well over 30 minutes now. Paternity fraud exposed insights and implications. Paternity fraud, widespread deception that misrepresents a child's biological father. We all know that. And then what is paternity fraud? How does paternity fraud happen? Well, it's simple. She sleeps around with somebody who she shouldn't be sleeping with. In selection, we explore this nuanced method through paternity fraud occurs. Scenario: the mother incorrectly identifies a man as a biological father when registering the child's birth, or she knows exactly who the biological father is and she gets a simp to put his name on the birth certificate, so she has no accountability. manipulation for child support. The child's mother deliberately engages in committed paternity fraud to manipulate the legal system and collect child support from a man who is not the biological father, as 25% of American men have found out. And DNA testing manipulation. In some cases, DNA evidence in the paternity testing process itself may be manipulated. We've seen cases of that. Miscommunication. Paternity fraud can also arise from miscommunication and misunderstanding between individuals involved, and unawareness of multiple potential fathers. That means she's been sleeping with multiple men and she's got knocked up by one of them. And the importance of paternity fraud statistics overview, and then we have all sorts of yada yada. But anyway, women are having babies, but they getting knocked up by guys who are not their partner. It's becoming a demographic emergency around the globe, and 1 in 3 of young adults will never marry because the guys have found out the juice is worse to squeeze and it's too dangerous for them. Marriage in America has changed over time. Few Americans are marrying than before, and the number of unmarried men is surging. That could be the MGTOW effect. So the storm is starting to break, people. So it's anybody's guess what's going to happen in the next few years as we get closer to 2030. But this situation isn't going to change until these laws are drastically changed, both in America and over here in Europe, and the female-friendly family courts are told to take the man's side more than always taking the woman's side. So I'm well over 30 minutes now, so I'll have to wrap it up now. You know the routine, people. Like, dislike, completely up to you. Until next Monday when I won't need to go out. So that's it from me. Bye-bye.